Record. Okay. Bill, we are
Okay,
now recording.
so Dr. Feldman and I were just discussing, I was discussing how, how I was feeling frustrated in my community because I'm finding people who are unable or unwilling to actually listen to reason, and I have these assumptions that people should be reasonable. Actually, I don't have these assumptions that people should be reasonable, and I'm not surprised when they're unreasonable. But notwithstanding that, it was very, very disappointing to me. That is, I live in a very religious community, and although I would even say 90% of the people are doing the right thing, there are outliers, 10%, and maybe those outliers a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago are causing another 20% to join them, right? There's still outliers who are, well, now they're basically doing the right thing. They will not say the right thing. They will not actually communicate honestly with their, I'm saying the leaders, will not communicate honestly with their congregation. And it just raises the whole question that Dr. Feldman and I have been discussing now about the nature of community, and how do you constitute community? By what means can you do it? And what do you do when you feel this intense frustration about not being able to talk to other people? I think that's really the question, Dr. Feldman, is for me, is there any place for critique? And what I'm doing on Twitter, is that just gratuitous and unnecessary? And really, as some people have said to me, that we should be helping each other, and we shouldn't blaming communities. We shouldn't do that. Is there any use in standing up and saying this is wrong, even when people are not listening?
Well, there's certainly a use. It's a very exasperating and lonely exercise. We said in a previous conversation, there is a long history, and perhaps this is another one that we should be attending to during these times of crisis, of the voices, the warning voices, the voices who attempt to reason, and not just to be right, but to save lives, and to point out and to save people from danger. The prophetic voice, the architects of the Western world that we live in, the founding fathers of our communities and collective structure of contemporary society, Hobbes and Locke, Rousseau and others, they made an assumption that was a very radical one, a very bold one, and also at times a very dangerous one of egalitarian reason, that we are all endowed with a natural faculty, endowed by nature, endowed by God, however they thought, wherever they thought this came from, but that the result, the consequence is that we are all rational figures, intelligent figures. When given the opportunity, will seek out the truth. And part of the tragedy of this coronavirus crisis around the world is how scary truth can be and how willingly we flee from it. I see it in my personal life with people who are very close to me. It's truly terrifying to see how unwilling, how reluctant people are to engage their natural faculty, even when their lives depend on it.
So yeah, so I guess, when criticizing the ultra-Orthodox community, I think, so they're not going to listen, right? I guess the question still is, and I'm interested in hearing what you were talking about, the dangerous side of reason, and I'd love to hear about that in a minute more. But I think there's a certain kind of optimism built into social critique. And if you can give that social critique in a reason that doesn't seem to be just motivated by self-interest, it can actually move people. I think, no? I'm asking,
there are a few elements. That first is that, I don't know if there's a danger of reason. I'm not a post-enlightenment thinker the way that it's trendy to be in our contemporary world. But the danger is that what the societies that these Enlightenment thinkers created, and I've been studying Locke for the last 10 days with your help and with the students, together with the students, the societies that they created depend on the use of reason. And when that use is too scary, when it becomes simply too frightening to look at what's in front of us, and I think the coronavirus has simply exacerbated an existing condition. I'm a strong environmentalist, that it is too expensive, too scary, too terrifying to use that faculty of reason and look at what is in front of us, and that is certainly what's happening in coronavirus, but it's been happening throughout my adult life. That is when the contemporary society, that's when the community, the government, and the political organization, these founding fathers of the Enlightenment, it's when it starts to break down. And it's not just fathers, it's also mothers, Wollstonecraft. But the danger is not in the faculty of reason, it is in what is in it is in taking that assumption as the bedrock of society. When society en masse in very large numbers refuses to listen to scientists, to plan ahead, to think rationally, there's and experts, the Cassandras, the Yirmiyahus, it's not you and me, it's the people who work in emergency management, the people who work in public health, the people who work in, it could be in deficit, in economic thinking, scientists saying like, nobody's listening to science anymore. Those are the real Cassandras of our time. When they are not heeded because it is simply too terrifying, too expensive, too inconvenient, too uncomfortable for people to simply say, okay, Pesach's not going to be the same this year, or I guess we'll have to make a major change. Those are very difficult things. I understand the motivation, but it is, I've also been saying it's like a Kahneman and Tversky experiment on steroids. How unreasonable reasonable people can be.
What is the experiment you mentioned? The experiment you mentioned?
So Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, two of the lions, titans of Israeli academia in the 20th century. Kahneman is still alive. So Kahneman, who's by far the better known of them because he lived much longer, might have one N at the end of his name, not sure, they based their career on a series of experiments debunking the premise of economics, that people will make the intelligent, rational choice. And they show how irrational people are and how stupid people are, even when it comes to dollars and cents.
Even when based on self-interest. Even when based on self-interest.
People have trouble understanding their self-interest. So an example of this could have been, people who are, let's take our communities. We both are religious Orthodox Jews. You could tell people 3 weeks ago, you're going to have to miss minyan. Your minyan will necessarily be canceled for a period of time. We can stop it today, and you'll miss 3 weeks of minyan, including the very important sacred biblical holiday of Passover, but you'll be able to go back right after Passover. Or you can keep going to minyan for another week. You'll go for Rosh Chodesh Nisan, but then you're going to miss Passover until the end of Shavuot, and possibly beyond. What's the rational thing to do? You pay the bill early, and we'll all go back. Matan, what is the thing? But no one was able to make that choice.
Okay, so let's break that down then.
And you could put dollars and cents on this also.
Wait. Let me ask you another question though first. We didn't make that choice because we didn't have the information, or we didn't make that choice because we were unwilling to face information that we had?
I think Kahneman would say it's the latter. I think the critique of rationality comes from that people are simply unwilling to imagine a potential but yet unrealized risk. Take out your money from the markets now, you'll save yourself this money.
Right.
It's an unrealized loss, right? It's not a loss that I have yet suffered. And all of this is unrealized loss. You can put dollars and cents on this. You can say the Western governments knew in late January, early February, they were going to have to pay billions of dollars to stop this in testing, in masks, in extra protective equipment, including masks, I guess, and including in a purposeful slowdown of the economy. They would have to create potentially even a modest recession. Billions of dollars of costs. Why? Because scientists told them this is bad. What did they do? Nothing. Instead, they said, we'll sign up for the the fairy tale version that that this won't be that bad. It's not as bad as everyone will tell us. I'll hold on to those billions right now. I'm not going to spend them and hope for the best. What are they doing now? They're on the hook for trillions of dollars, an exponential cost. What's the rational thing to do? Once again, it's obvious in hindsight. People have an inability, a deep-seated reluctance to looking at reality in the face. I'm going to take a break for a few seconds. I'm just going to pause this. I'll take your. I definitely want to keep talking, but by the time you did something, I'm just going to pause the recording.
For sure.
Let's record and.
Okay.
Sorry.
So
now we're back.
I wanted to just go back to what you were saying. I wonder if this blindness to reason is exacerbated by the fact that we believe in that we live in a quote unquote reasonable society. Meaning we claim that we are somehow the end of reason, and we look back at the past and say, well, look at those primitive people in the past. We're reasonable, we've made progress. It just seems like it's very easy to be in denial about really not doing what you were saying before, or actually being subject to those forces. Those forces seem even more powerful when you have this very strong belief that you're being reasonable all the time.
Mm-hmm. And we live in a society that tells itself it's reasonable. We live in a world created by these figures who believed in reason, but they do write, at least Locke does, about the breakdown, the collapse of reason, and how that would lead to the collapse of the state.
Let's look at that passage from Tenure, Kings and Magistrates. So we were talking about that earlier. So Milton writes this. I believe he writes this in 1648. And it's wrong. Bill is wrong. The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, 1650s.
It's published in 1650. I don't know what it means when it was written.
My graduate school brain tells me that it's before before Charles was killed. Anyway, let's just read. Just getting the date right is kind of important to just see where Milton is at. Meaning I think he's feeling incredibly frustrated with a nation that, according to his own lights, is not acting reasonably. And Milton's conception of reason is actually different than that of Locke and Hobbes, and makes him, that's why Milton is not in all of the collections of Enlightenment thinking, because Milton's belief in reason is still connected to that older worldview, in which if only people behaved in a certain manner, if they only behaved properly, they would actually be able to access right reason. And right reason for Milton is a reason that is dictated somehow by the divine. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do, but it elevates your mind in such a way that you can choose on your own. So this is written 2 weeks, thank you, Dr. Feldman, after Charles is executed. Wow, in February 1649. So Charles is executed, and it's a hugely dramatic moment in English history. He's executed outside of Whitehall. And it's not only the killing of a person, we can talk about assassinations in our time, Kennedy or Rabin, and we feel the power of that because they're representatives of the state. Not only because they're great people, but because they're representatives of the state. So all the more so, in January of 1649, when Parliament, or the version of Parliament that existed then, voted to try Charles and to execute him, the execution of a king was all the more powerful. You're not only executing a person, you're not only executing a figure of political authority, you're executing a figure of divine authority, right?
Yeah.
And Milton was, right, and that's why, when Charles II came back in 1660, Milton was on the list of people to make an example of, to kill, whatever he got out of it. But Milton's ideas are extremely radical, meaning people there were lots of people in the army who killed the king, but Milton wrote justification and after justification to justify the king's execution. We did it, and it was the right thing to do. So I think the first 3 sentences of this, I think, are worth reading, and then we can decide if we're going to go any further. Dr. Feldman, would you read it? I can't really see it that clearly.
So how far should it go? Do you have in a sense? we'll just read and then we'll read it.
That right there. No,
Another
I think
sentence also?
the next sentence, yeah, compliances.
Okay. So I'm just going to put in the chat so that it's there for the students, because the chat is automatically saved as well. It makes it easy to sort of share your Blackboard.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Okay. If men within themselves would be governed by reason.
There you go.
And not,
right. I mean, that's where this is exactly coming from our conversation. This question, if they would be governed by reason, and the assumption is they're not. They're not.
What would they do? Yeah. It's frozen. I'm not sure why I can't get it to go into the chat. I'll try later. Okay. If men within themselves would be governed by reason and not generally give up their understanding to a double tyranny of custom from without and blind affections from within, they would discern better what it is to favor and uphold the tyrant of a nation. But being slaves within doors, yeah.
You're gonna read the whole thing and then we'll go back?
Yeah, I think so. But being slaves within, unless you really think that's ill-advised, but being slaves within doors, no wonder that they strive so much to have the public state comfortably governed to the inward vicious rule by which they govern themselves. For indeed, none can love freedom heartily, but good men. The rest love not freedom, but license, which neither hath more scope or more indulgence than under tyrants. Hence is it that tyrants are not oft offended, nor stand much in doubt of bad men, as being all naturally servile, but in whom virtue and true worth most is eminent. Them they fear in earnest, as by right their masters. Against them lies all their hatred and suspicion. Consequently, neither do bad men. Yeah.
Go ahead, continue.
Neither do bad men hate tyrants, but have always been readiest with the falsified names of loyalty and obedience to color over their base compliances, which comes straight from Plato, by the way. It comes directly from Plato.
Okay. Where in Plato? In the Republic?
In the Republic, he has a section on tyrants, on how democracy, right? How the Republic slides into oligarchy and then tyranny.
I just
bad men love tyrants. They are happy to.
I just read this and I just think it's a description of the Trump administration. I mean, it's absolutely. So how do you read the first sentence?
If people, so you're right, it absolutely is a criticism from what you were just saying earlier. It is a critique, it is a skepticism about reason. If we governed with reason and didn't surrender our reason in favor of the double tyranny, I love that. He's making a metaphor that drives the heart of his subject. The double tyranny is not the tyranny of a ruler, it's tyranny of our minds.
Wow.
Which is the condition that has led to the tyranny of a political ruler. But here his brilliance is that he's using a metaphor, he's implanting it here in that opening line to give us to give a lie to what he's going to actually be addressing.
He's really wait, I'm just saying, see, he's really giving in the 17th century, he's kind of giving a sociological or psychological
intellectual
but also the reason that people can't, it's a psychological explanation of mass movements, basically. I mean, now I'm putting it into 20th century terms.
It's great. Yeah, these terms are what is the double tyranny? I'm sorry that the chat's not, for some reason it seems to be frozen for me, but the double tyranny is, you can read about these in the New York Times today. Custom from without, blind affections from within. Habit, read Charles Duhigg's books and the many books about habits today. Virtuous habits, doing your yoga practice every day, meditation, and how, or addiction, opioid, or sex, or pornography, habit, how we just do, or what we've been wrestling with the last few weeks and during this Corona crisis. I have to go to the gym every day. I have to go to the base medrash every day. I have to see my grandmother. Habit on the one hand, tyranny from one side, and blind affections, emotion, habit and emotion. Why do we do most of what we do? Daniel Kahneman will say this over and over again in his academic as well as his popular writings. Daniel Kahneman says, we do what we do because we're just used to it. Habit, routine. We don't think about it. We're automated all the time. And when we are driven, we're driven not usually by reason, but we are driven by our feelings, by emotions.
Great. So continue, yeah?
So if you would generally, excuse me, where were we?
We're up to
If
the
men
comment.
would be governed by reason and
Yeah,
weren't governed by these two much
yeah,
more powerful motivators,
yeah.
then they would understand, they would discern better. And we're just kind of doing just a translation here, a paraphrase. I am so far. They
Which
would,
is enough.
yeah, they would discern better. They would understand how better to govern themselves rather than uphold the tyrant of a nation. There he moves from the metaphor, the double tyranny of custom and emotion, to the
Wow.
actual tyrant, the tyrant that risks our common good, our own,
The
public
poetics
good,
of the poetics of prose, right?
the poetics of politics. Yeah.
Beautiful, incredible, right? Never saw that before. Go ahead, yeah.
But we are slaves within doors. What does that mean, slaves within doors? We're approaching Pesach, this festival of
No, no,
freedom and slavery. What does that mean?
in the psyche, but being slaves with indoors, in our psyche, in our brain, in our minds.
Okay. And because we are not free to exercise, we do not allow free exercise of that reason. Oh, it's also, by the way, governed. No, I forgot to mention this. Maybe you noticed it. It says governed by reason.
Right,
This is all about
right,
governance, right?
right.
And how we
Governance.
govern our minds. This is what I was trying to express, but probably did a poor job of it with the 303 students. But how we govern our minds is going to shape how we govern each other.
So internal sovereignty will affect external sovereignty.
And this entire structure that first Milton and Hobbes and Locke, and then the 18th century thinkers after them, what they are developing is a notion of how society can be governed by the internal principle, the personal principle of enlightened self-interest. How enlightened self-interest, reason, and the interest of the self can be the basis for social contract and a political order of enlightenment. Right?
But as I was saying to you before, though, Milton he's before that.
Yeah, but God is the one who
God is still here. God is very much present for Milton.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the others are not saying that. So anyway, so but it's all based on governed by reason. I don't think it's an idle. That's my point, is simply to flag that in that opening clause, it is not an idle metaphor. Governed by reason leads to the double tyranny of custom and habit, which leads to then how have we allowed ourselves to be governed by a tyrant of a nation? We are slaves.
You'll note, just as before you continue reading, that this metaphor that you just pointed out of governance is going to be repeated twice in the next sentence.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Good.
Yeah.
And because slaves are not governed. Slaves are governed by slaves are ruled. Slaves are not governed by any power of the self. This, of course, is a early prefiguration of the famous line opening Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Social Contract, that everywhere man is born free, but is everywhere in chains. That we make ourselves slaves. For Rousseau, it was because he saw society as the great ill. For Milton, what is it that makes us all slaves? I'm not sure. Is it
idolatry?
Okay, idolatry too.
Let's put it differently. An idolatry of, let's say, king or religion in such a way that you are giving up your own agency. Once you idolize, once you agree to be, like in the Spencerian sense, astonished by this outer image of authority, once you lose your senses, you have no agency. And when you have no agency, that means then you no longer have the ability to access the divine part of your brain, which will elevate you from custom and blind affection.
Terrifying, but bracing, challenging, but very.
Because it's funny, as you're talking, I'm just thinking we're so used to the optimism of political discourse, and it's extremely pessimistic.
I don't know. These. It is very pessimistic. All these strictures, all these, the whole assumption, both the philosophy and the history, the philosophy, the social contract thinkers, these Enlightenment philosophers and early thinkers of the state and modern society assumed the worst of people. And it was in order to safeguard either people from themselves, or even if people can be more virtuous in their own sphere, but it's the interaction that makes people, but it was in order to create a better alternative. Likewise, the whole Enlightenment period, the post-Civil War, 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, post-English Civil War, it was a period of mass licking of wounds and thinking, we simply can't do this. People, it came out of trauma. This is something that has been very apparent to me for the last month as we've entered into the first stages of the coronavirus, the corona crisis. It didn't come from, the world is great and people can work together and everyone is so, man is such a lofty figure endowed with reason. It was done recalling the horrors of the 100 Years' War, the 30-Year War. Treaty of Westphalia was not done it was not a project of idealism. Treaty of Westphalia is what created the modern state in Europe, but rather it was an act of compromise. Let's just stop. There must be a better way than all of us killing each other in the name of our various versions of Christ.
See, I think that's a really important statement. And I think liberalism has to be understood precisely in that way. Liberalism is a compromise with history, meaning we have to give up our messianism, because if we bring messianism into history, if we bring that religious enthusiasm into history, we end up killing each other.
And they knew what it looked like. They and their parents and grandparents knew what it looked like. They had just done that for 150 something years.
So I guess
it was not hypothetical.
I guess the question then is I mean, I think the answer is unfortunately so obvious because the world is so big now, but can the trauma that we're living in today, can that allow for new conceptions of community? Can it allow for new conceptions of leadership? Or is it just going to be totalitarian dictators or, whatever, autocrats taking advantage of a horrifying situation? I mean, it just seems that the latter is so much the more obvious. And that's when people,
you know me personally. Yeah.
No, that's when people say to me, why are you bothering going and talking to people in shul? Stay home. My kid's saying this. It's like they're saying, if Jeremiah were alive, he'd be watching Netflix. Stop, don't get upset, right? You're not going to change them anyway. But I guess the reason that I do it is that this is some screwed up idealism that I have that having this conversation makes a difference.
I admire that idealism and I encourage it. I seldom can embrace it myself. I've been challenged with that this past week when relatives in places of grave danger are acting, to my mind, imprudently, to put it lightly. And my usual principle of behavior, as you know, is a very pessimistic one. People can't change much. It's very difficult to persuade people to act differently, even when it is clearly in their self-interest to follow your advice. People are so
you and I are both absolute idealists about reason and total pessimists about it at the same time.
About its application, possibility.
No, we are idealistic about its possibility in some sense, but we feel reality is so far from that possibility that we despair of it ever being realized.
Yeah, and I too have tried to sound alarms. Baruch Hashem, I don't need to do it in the street or in my building, but with family members or with people that I know quite well who are endangering their lives and the lives of others, I've tried to, and I thank God we also, because of what we do, our academic bearing, and some other elements that we've discussed in previous conversations, we're somewhat conditioned to put together the pattern of what is happening around the world. Although we're not epidemiologists, we have the capacity to seek out the truth, to exercise that power of reason as best we command it, and to share that with others. And people are so reluctant that it can be horrifying. Oh, I just don't want to hear that right now. I was optimistic 3 weeks ago when it dawned on me exactly what was going to happen next, the week of Purim, which was the middle of March, which was, for me and my family, a transformative week when we understood exactly schools were going to be closed down. We started changing our behavior in important ways. I started to think this could be a tragic and difficult, but ultimately restorative crisis. I even said to you the one time I saw you, and no crisis should ever go to waste. For the coronavirus, while absolutely horrifying and expensive and deadly and tragic and causing untold suffering to many millions of people, it is not the most urgent crisis we face. It wasn't before it began, and it won't, and it isn't when it eventually comes under control, whether that is in a few months or a few years. Climate change remains that, and the same principles that have unleashed the coronavirus upon us, which is an act of organic nature, it's not even a living thing, are likewise inherent in the climate crisis. People don't have a reckoning. The people don't rise up and say all of a sudden, we need better leaders. Halavai, if only that were to happen. It has never happened. It doesn't happen in the prophetic works of Judaism or in Christianity. It's not going to happen in our time. You and I talked about, will there be a reckoning? Will there be a reckoning after Trump? People are slow, stubborn, and dull, as Hobbes correctly diagnosed. But what does have a reckoning is nature. Nature really does push back. The reason these viruses, these pandemics are becoming more frequent is because we've changed nature. We invade natural places. Our circulation of people is unnatural. And nature really does have a kind of, it's not any sentient property, but it does have a kind of rebellion. What we need to get ourselves out of the current mess, the current crisis, which is urgent and requires the marshaling of all energies of government around the world and the cooperation of private individuals like you and me and our students, are the same properties that will allow for the kind of re-engineering, the redesigning of society that humanity in general needs. Listen to the experts. Respect science. Elect, appoint, and appoint leaders who are trustworthy and who themselves can integrate and act upon the advice of leaders. And finally, return to the nature of a true social contract, of putting the larger good, the collective, some value that is not you personally and your own desires above those of yourselves. And upon that, choose your course of action. It's the same thing that we'll need to do in general as a species. It's what we're going to need to do now to get out of this crisis. And I am very pessimistic about it happening. And nature will just continue to slap us. You know, it's a metaphor, because nature doesn't do anything. Nature doesn't think. There is no consciousness behind it. There's no agency. But these things will just continue getting worse.
Where are the strong and who are the trusted? Elvis Costello. What's so funny about
let's go back to what it says here. Virtuous men. Let me start sharing again here. So virtuous, that's a very dark reading of it. But I do see that as, I was very optimistic. I said, maybe this is the crisis that will draw people together, make us understand how to work in concert, to trust international experts. And this could be the moment where humanity realizes we can do great things. Maybe that will still happen. Maybe the U.S. Army and the responsible parties in the United States will come to literally the cavalry will ride to the rescue.
No, it's interesting when you think of post-World War II, America did come to the rescue. America saved democracy. America made a free world. America's not in the position to do that anymore. We're destroying.
And it's because it's become a very, this is something I said to students this morning. We've drawn the wrong lesson from Locke. We've started to focus only on the rights of the individual. And what Locke talks about in my reading of Locke was, Locke talks about the rights of the individual as a means of creating the common good. That the rights of the individual have run amok. Everyone is just focused on themselves. Everyone's afraid that they themselves would get sick. It's not a personal health crisis for most people. It is for many people, but for most people will be asymptomatic carriers anyway. Won't suffer anything. It's a public health crisis. It's about what your actions mean for the larger good. Okay, let's. Your question about time is correct. So let's look at what else happens in this
Let's look at one more sentence, and then we'll.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we can look at the beginning. But good men, freedom is loved only heartily by good men, while bad men love tyrants.
For indeed none can love freedom heartily, but good men. The rest, not freedom, but license. What's the difference between license and freedom? License is I get to go to the mall. License is I get to get drunk.
I get to whatever I want, yeah.
I get to overconsume, which never hath more scope or more indulgence than under tyrants. And Milton says, real rulers do not tolerate license because license gets in the way of freedom. But tyrants actually, they encourage license because this is Milton's perspective, that once you give yourself into your tendencies to be licentious, and license means you're not licentious, like what I just said, but license about being free from any kinds of restrictions. Once you give into that, you've lost your freedom, you've lost your agency, and that's exactly what tyrants want. Tyrants don't want free people. You see, and that's autocratic rulers across the world today. Whatever.
Yeah, and he also has an account of why tyrants, why bad rulers remain in office. It's not, and he's noticed here, it's similar to what is happening. Unfortunately, in many countries, especially the United States, that bad men remain in office not by their own power and force, but through the obsequious loyalty and obedience of bad men. It's the abettors who allow the tyrants to remain in office.
Okay, Dr. Feldman, that was a great conversation. We'll have to continue this.
I look forward to it. All right.
Great. So thank you, and we'll be back with democracy and the 17th century. We'll be back with that next week.
All right. Take care. Wish you and your family well.